What if I told you that there is a film where a young woman, our protagonist, goes to a remote location, and in that remote location, there's a cult. And throughout the film, she starts to suspect that something's not quite right in this place, and she wants to leave, and she's the only one who seems to get this feeling, and then bad things start to happen. Now, you would say, that's Midsommar. And it is, but it's also Blink Twice, and it's also Opus, which I just went to see. And funnily enough, Opus is also an A24 film, just like Midsommar, which baffles me. I don't know why they would put out two films that are just the same thing, but the second one is not as good. Maybe they were trying to capitalize on the success of Midsommar. They're like, let's get a new one going. But it's good. It's a fine film. There's a lot to like about it. There's a lot to criticize, but it's not as good as Midsommar. And between the two, I would likely watch Midsommar again. I've watched it twice. I watched the theatrical cut in cinema. Fantastic. Loved that. A great experience. I watched the director's cut at home with friends. Amazing. Liked it even more than the theatrical release. Opus, probably won't watch it again. I enjoyed myself. I had a few laughs. There's one scene that involves jogging. Tickled me immensely. But I'm probably not going to watch it again. So this film stars Iowa Debris. She's great in The Bear, great in Bottoms. I thought that was good crack. But I don't think Opus is her best performance. Now, that could be because with The Bear, it's a TV show. There's a lot more time with the character. She gets to feel it out a lot more and explore that character so we can connect with them more. Opus is pretty short. It's like an hour and a half, hour 40. Pretty standard, what you'd expect from A24. But because of that, there's not a lot of time with the character. We didn't really get to connect with them that much. Also, I just don't think the writing is on the same level as The Bear. It's a good film, but it's not amazing. As for John Malkovich, I've seen him in a ton of stuff, and he's pretty much always great. However, for him also, I don't think this is his best role. He did some interesting stuff with it, but early in the film in particular, he sounds, I don't know, maybe he's just getting old or he's ill, I don't know, but his voice sounded really shaky, and it was a bit distracting at times. The wardrobe for both of those characters, excellent. I loved it. So for Io, for her character Ariel, she is kind of a black sheep. Like, everyone else is dressing in suits and, skirts, pretty standard stuff. And she's in these, like, I don't want to use the word ugly, but more like vintage cardigans. For John Malkovich, he's in the wildest clothes. So he's playing this kind of superstar, almost like an Elton John kind of figure. And the outfits are as wild as you would think. So you're talking bright colors, sequins. At one point, he's in a suit that looks like he could be in Daft Punk. And I'm super into that. It looked really out of place and bizarre, but that's kind of what the character was supposed to be. Loved it. Now, because Malkovich's character is supposed to be this world-famous rock star, pop star, what have you, naturally you would expect the music to be, up to scratch with that kind of character. And I will say there is one track in particular called Dina Simone. It is a bit of a banger. Now, as much as I enjoyed Dina Simone, I do think it's a good song. It's catchy. I enjoyed it in the theatre. I've checked it out since. It's solid. Nile Rodgers worked on this film. He has written how many famous tracks? We could have had a few more, like, really hard-hitting bangers in this one. Dina Simone's great. I liked it. But come on, dude. What are you playing at? You got an hour 40. You can put more hits in it. The overall scoring of the film had some very interesting choices. Like, they're out in the desert for most of it in this resort. So they use a mouth harp only, from what I can recall, only for like the first half of the movie. I never hear mouth harp in anything, but it's such a satisfying sound. People, if you're making a movie, please put mouth harp in it. I will come see your film. Put that in the promotion for the film. Hey, you guy, this has mouth harp in it. I'll turn up. I'll pay the price of admission for a little bit of mouth harp action. There were quite a few parts of the score that reminded me of Midsommar as well. Another likeness. There were many likenesses to Midsommar, but the music was the first thing that clued me into this similarity, and I couldn't not notice it. Because this is an A24 film, you can expect some good cinematography, and this was overall a well-shot film. I'm not a film student or anything. I don't know the intricacies of how a film is shot, but usually I can look at a film and go, that looks pretty good. I like that shot. If it stands out to me, I can just assume that there's something good about it, or something that, for me, as an avid film watcher, it's worth looking at. there's something good in it. There are a lot of aerial shots in this film, a lot of symmetry, a lot of bold primary colours that really draw your eye to the centre of the shot. It draws your eye so much that anything that's going on around it almost becomes irrelevant. And then oftentimes what was happening in the background or either side of this like central focal point was symmetrical, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. There were some pretty gnarly special effects in this film as well. Like, obviously, you know, A24, it's going to be horror. They lean horror. I don't know if they exclusively do horror, but from most of what I've seen of them, it's horror. And I love horror with practical effects. I love Alien. I love The Thing. Evil Dead. It can be campy. It can be really gory, what have you. I'm not super into things like Terrifier, but if you're going to use practical effects in a horror film, it just hits so much harder than an abundance of CGI. And you can use them together for a great result, but most of the time I prefer films that lean into practical effects, and this did it very well. There's one scene in particular, I'm not going to say what happens in the scene in case you want to watch it and not have it spoiled, but they use a lot of close-ups, and the practical effects in that scene and the editing, it makes you feel real nervous and very like unsettled, and the practical effects are very effective. It's good horror and it's simple horror. A lot of shots are hands and feet in this film. Some of them were for, you know, purposes related to the story. Other ones, I just think they're like feet. And that's okay, but you don't have to put it in, you don't have to put your kink in the movie. I guess that's your call as a filmmaker. I wouldn't. There was one moment in particular of very unusual editing, and I don't know if it was a choice or an accident or what have you, but it made it into the film, whichever it was. And basically there's a scream. So a character screams, and then there's an L cut. And then the scream carries on into the next shot, as it should, but then it cuts abruptly. So they scream, it carries over, and then it cuts anyway. And I don't know if that was an accident. I don't know. But it was very odd and very just unsettling. Maybe it was an editing choice to make the audience feel uncomfortable. And I did. Don't do that. It would have felt better to me if the cut faded or if it echoed or delayed or whatever, and it like carried over in whatever way you want to do it, or if it cut like it did anyway with the shot. So like just cut the shot and then cut the scream at that same time. It felt weird for it to carry over and then cut it. Okay, so we're going to get into spoilers now. So if you don't want spoilers, this bit ain't for you. Considering the runtime of this film isn't that long, it does try to tackle a lot of different subjects at once. Misogyny, killing creativity, overindulgence of violence, all kinds of stuff. The one that stood out to me the most was the overindulgence of violence, and this is explored mostly at the end of the film, and it reminded me of Christine Chubbuck. I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly, I've always just read it, I don't think I've ever heard it said aloud, but it reminds me of the fact that if like people like to indulge in violence and they find it entertaining, like on the news, all you get, if there's a violent story, it's at the head of the news, and that's always what's going to draw people's attention. And it's a sad thing, frankly, and especially with like Instagram's had times when people have been shown purely gore and, you know, other disturbing media, and people can't look away from it. And this film does tackle that, and it's a good subject to enlighten people about. But I feel like it could have been explored more in the film and not just at the very end. It was kind of exploring the fact that people don't necessarily care about the vile things people do as long as it's entertaining and as long as it's going to get clicks. So the main character, Ariel, she goes to this resort, retreat, what have you, to write an article or a review about this famous singer Moretti, played by John Malkovich. And while she's there, bad things start happening. She suspects that bad things are happening, and all she can think about is that I need to get out of here and I need to tell people about what's going on in this place. And all the while, that's kind of what the people there want to happen, because you can write about all these horrible things, and the worse it is, the more fascinating and confusing and vile it is, the more likely people are to read it. And they don't have to necessarily like what they're reading, but it resonates with them in a way, in a dark way. And it just makes it even more renowned and even more famous, and it gives more notoriety to the people who've done the horrible acts than it would have had you not said anything at all. If you think about how many serial killer documentaries there are, or TV shows, like there's ones about Dahmer and Ramirez and all of these people who did horrible things, and yet we can't stop watching them. I think that's a really good thing to shed a light on, but it's a theme that's only explored for like 5 minutes at the end of the film. I get that it's supposed to be this like shock moment, but it feels like it could have been more than that. It also explores like both ends of idolizing celebrities, like for the people who see them as like the greatest and they just want to be them or be near them, or, you know, consuming whatever they make and they're the greatest in their eyes. There's a lot of that, and it's very true to the world we live in. Like, I think about anyone who's a fan of Beyonce. To me, it's always felt like a cult, and I just don't understand it from the outside. And on the other hand, you have the people who review and write about the celebrities. Now, that can be in so many different ways, whether it's actors, musicians, or whatever. But this in particular is about the predatory journalism, like tabloid journalism, paparazzi. They use the example of Billie Holiday in the film, and I love the music of Billie Holiday. I think she's a fantastic artist. And they even bring up Strange Fruit. And I think if you're going to bring up Billie Holiday, don't make it like a 2-minute segment of your film, because that's such a good example of this. And I think it was wasted. Like, they bring Billie Holiday up in this part of the film where it's essentially supposed to be the turning point, like this big reveal where everything's going to come out and it's all going to go wrong and people start dying and all that kind of stuff. And because of that, it kind of loses its meaning. Like, you're going to bring up a really heavy topic and an important part of history only to write it off 2 seconds later for a practical horror effect. I love horror, I love practical effects, but that was not the time. If you're going to make a point, commit to it. Anyway, I've ranted enough. It's a good film. I'd recommend watching it if you're into Billie Holiday or feet. It's not amazing. It's got stuff to love. It's got stuff to go about. Just go watch it. Go support cinemas, man. I don't really know what to rate this film. If it sounds like your kind of thing, go watch it. Definitely go listen to Strange Fruit. And that's it. That's all I got. Okay, bye. Hey, what's going on? So, I didn't mention this in the video, but I find it unusual how people in this film don't comment on the fact that weird stuff is happening. Like, even when shot with an arrow, people are just like, hey, that's the life of the rich and famous.